Good afternoon, everybody. This is Lloyd Carter down in the Valley, monthly show that focuses on water issues, environmental issues, and farming in the San Joaquin Valley, and we have a good show planned for you today. Our first guest is Teri McCall, who is the widow of a Cambria farmer who died the day after Christmas 4 months ago of a rare cancer, and his widow has filed a suit claiming that Roundup, the world's most widely used herbicide, was responsible for his cancer. And she's accompanied by her attorney, Brent. Is it Wisner?
It's Wisner, Lloyd.
Wisner, Brent. Thank you. The lawsuit, which was filed in federal court in Los Angeles on March 9th, alleges that the Monsanto company, based in St. Louis, Missouri, failed to adequately warn farmers that its blockbuster herbicide Roundup causes cancer. One of the things I just learned, Brent, was that the prior pesticide that Monsanto was making a fortune off of was DDT. When DDT went out of business because it was shown to be toxic to humans and wildlife, and it was banned in the U.S., then Monsanto came up with Roundup. The key element here is glyphosate. Brent, tell us a little bit about what glyphosate is and why the rest of the world seems to be way ahead of the United States on this subject.
It's pretty interesting, actually. In the 1970s, right, sort of just in the aftermath of the federal government's ban on DDT, Monsanto really needed to fill this vacuum of revenue that they had lost from their previous blockbuster herbicide, and that's where Roundup comes into play. Now, Roundup is actually an herbicide that's generally used in sort of an all-purpose way. It's used to treat a whole host of crops, as well as genetically modified crops that are specifically designed to not be affected by Roundup. They're called Roundup-ready crops. And basically what's happening is in the 1970s, Roundup got approved by the EPA, and the primary ingredient within it, which is glyphosate, was tested, and actually the EPA originally characterized it as potentially cancerous. And then Monsanto sent a bunch of new studies and unpeer-reviewed literature and information and data to the EPA and convinced them that the EPA couldn't conclude that it in fact was cancerous. And at that point, Roundup hit the market, and it's been steadily increasing in use worldwide. What's really interesting is, and you bring this up right off the bat, is why is the rest of the world ahead of us? Well, the World Health Organization just recently, and just last year, did a comprehensive review of glyphosate, which showed that the herbicide actually is a probable human cancer, based on publicly peer-reviewed data that's available in the literature today. And they also concluded that it was directly linked with a type of cancer called non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is actually the type of cancer that Jack McCall ultimately was diagnosed with and ultimately passed away from. And so that actually has spurred a bunch of countries to take action about this. Several countries have banned its use altogether. Some have proposals to ban it. Some have banned it in private use or in certain contexts. And so a lot of other countries are sort of taking initiative and trying to regulate the use of this product, glyphosate, in their countries, out of concern that this, in fact, exposing it not only to farmers, but potentially people who are using products that are consuming glyphosate are being exposed to this carcinogen.
Teri, your husband, Jack, he went to the hospital last September. He had swollen lymph nodes in his neck. And that same day, he learned that the swelling was being caused by anaplastic large cell lymphoma, a rare and aggressive version of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And of course, he didn't make a link to Roundup because he had been told over and over again by the chemical company that Roundup was safe. And then 3 months after his diagnosis of this rare cancer, on Christmas Eve, this most recent Christmas Eve, he suffered a stroke, and he died the day after Christmas. He was a Vietnam veteran, a very popular man in the community. Hundreds and hundreds of people went to his funeral. What struck me was interesting, maybe you can tell me a little bit about this, is what happened to Duke, your black Labrador dog?
It was probably longer ago than I thought. I originally thought it was 3 years ago, but I think it was more like 4 or 5. He developed lumps in his neck, and I took him to the vet, and they biopsied it, and I just got the results back from, I didn't even, really, I was so devastated that I didn't even really realize what kind of cancer it was, except I knew it was a type of lymphoma. And I just got the results back from the archives, and it was a large cell lymphoma, like similar to what Jack had. And we had to, we tried to keep Duke with us, but he was in too much pain, and we eventually had to put him down, and he was only like 6 or 7 years old. And then when Jack got the lumps in his neck in June, I remember thinking what
a coincidence,
a strange coincidence that was, that he got lumps in his neck too.
Maybe more than a coincidence.
I never mentioned it to Jack because I just thought, well, he doesn't really need to think about that. But afterwards, I thought it was kind of significant.
Yeah. Now, one of your attorneys is Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., big name, obviously, in American history. Brent, what role? You folks provided me some background material, and here's a quote from Bobby Kennedy, Jr. Mounting evidence suggests that Monsanto knew about the hazards posed by glyphosate exposure, but failed to disclose this information to the public. Anytime a corporation markets a harmful product to consumers as safe for use, it must be held accountable for the damage caused by that product. Brent, do you know what role that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is going to play in these legal proceedings?
Yeah, Bobby is a good friend of ours. We work with his firm closely, and I don't know if you're aware of this. You probably are, Lloyd. Mr. Kennedy Bobby has been doing litigation against Monsanto with regards to the PCB litigation for quite some time, particularly on behalf of cities and states who've had people get sick because of their exposure to that chemical, also, of course, manufactured by Monsanto. So Bobby works closely with us, and he's been helping us not only with outreach to getting awareness of these risks to farmers and agricultural workers, but he's going to play and has played a lead role in helping us understand how to litigate a case against a corporate giant like Monsanto. And as you can imagine, they hire some of the best attorneys in the world, and they have a sort of reputation in the legal community as being an organization that doesn't pull any punches when it comes to litigating. So he's playing a central role in helping us, navigate that sort of minefield and how to properly bring a toxic tort case against a company like Monsanto.
Yeah, mentioning General Electric and their dumping of PCBs in the Hudson River, which they claim they had a permit for. Don't be surprised if that comes up tonight in the Senator Sanders-Hillary Clinton debate. That may become an issue in those proceedings. Brent, what can you tell me about glyphosate studies involving animals, not just humans, but dogs? Or seems to me like dogs are close to the ground and sniffing everything in sight and are more likely to suffer. I wonder if there's been any research on impacts, if not on domestic animals, then on wildlife.
Well, I know I'm not familiar with the scope of research on animals generally in nature and wildlife, but I know as part of the sort of clinical trial gambit, or the studies that they do before they register a pesticide or herbicide, and that they regularly do over time, and different organizations within the federal and state government sort of review these data and look at new data as it comes out. There have been many animal studies evaluating whether or not exposure to glyphosate can lead to some of the things that suggest that it can in fact cause cancer. And I know there's been several studies with rats as well as fish that have shown that when animals are exposed to glyphosate, when they actually look at the cells for those animals, they start seeing DNA strand breaks occur, and which we all know is, the mutation of a cell is what is the genesis of cancer. And so there's been a lot of data that's been accumulating, and in fact has been done and shown that glyphosate exposure in animals, and actually they're starting to show this in humans as well now, that prolonged exposure to this chemical, in fact, can lead to DNA strand breaks, which is a very likely mechanism for how it can actually cause cancer.
I went to there's a website, roundup.com, I think it is, just to see what the company was saying, and there wasn't anything in there about safety issues. I couldn't find anything on that website, how to apply it, but no mention, that it poses any risk to cats and dogs or farm animals or humans. They just completely ignore the subject.
Right.
Lloyd, actually.
What's that?
It's really funny. If you go to a local store and you buy a package of Roundup, right there on the label it says it only affects an enzyme not found in humans, because that's how Roundup works as an herbicide. And there's actually been some interesting litigation on this point, separately from Mrs. McCall's case or Teri's case. But basically, that statement that it doesn't affect an enzyme found in humans is just a blatant misrepresentation. And there's clear evidence that Roundup is in fact affecting enzymes that are found in humans. It's just not necessarily affecting human enzymes. It's affecting the microbes within human guts, in the human gut, that we rely upon for digestion and nutrition and a whole host of other health outcomes. And that it affects those enzymes. And so the label just slapped right on the front of the bottle itself is actually misleading. It's sort of interesting.
You're listening to KFCF 88.1 FM. This is Lloyd Carter down in the valley. We're visiting with Teri McCall, the widow of cancer victim Jack McCall, and her attorney Brent Wisner. Brent, you directed me to some excellent educational video, I guess you'd call it, on YouTube. Is there a couple of keywords that people can go to YouTube and look at some of your material?
Well, I know we have a website up right now that's really easy to get to. It's called roundupcase.com. And what we've done is we've tried our best to sort of lay out all the science and actually provide links directly to the studies that the science and the summaries are based on. And there you'll also find a series of YouTube videos and sort of a host of information that people can look at to sort of start to get educated on what this case is about. And obviously on our website you can also learn about the lawsuit itself and learn about Jack McCall, who, as Teri can attest, was a loved and beloved farmer in the Cambria area. So that's sort of the website I'd give you. It would be roundupcase.com.
I thought that I heard or saw the other day that the EPA has agreed to revisit the issue of the safety of Roundup. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, actually. So basically last year, the sequence of events was the EPA had issued its preliminary ruling that they were going to re-register glyphosate as being a pesticide that can be used in the category of whether or not it's, that it's not a carcinogen. Shortly after that, the World Health Organization issued its monograph on glyphosate, and after these 11 scientists from all over the country, reviewed all this data and published this really comprehensive document saying, this is what the data shows us, that in fact is likely a human carcinogen and that it's linked to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Once that happened, the EPA suspended its re-registration of glyphosate and said, well, we need to really take another look at this. So since then, it's been, and that was supposed to happen in December of last year, and we're still waiting to hear from the EPA on what it's going to do. I know a couple of groups are actually heading to the EPA in June of this year to testify before the EPA about why the glyphosate should not be re-registered. It's a group of scientists and researchers and doctors who have kind of cobbled together a coalition to sort of present the science that suggests that the EPA should not re-register it. And it's really funny, actually, also in response to the World Health Organization's monograph on glyphosate. Actually, the California the Office of Environmental Health and Human Hazards here in California has decided to put glyphosate on the Prop 65 list. So it will be a substance known to the state of California to cause cancer. That's really interesting, is because now Monsanto has actually just recently filed a lawsuit in Fresno, actually state court, seeking to stop the California from putting glyphosate on the Prop 65 list, arguing that it would be unconstitutional and a whole bunch of other issues. And so Monsanto is fighting tooth and nail to prevent any regulatory action that would show here in the U.S. that this product of theirs is associated with cancer. And it's sort of an interesting legal battle that's just getting started right now and is continuing, is in fact ongoing.
Teri, did you or Jack make the connection between his rare cancer and the Roundup before he passed away?
No, we
weren't sure.
Well, he was really sick, and our son actually is the one who brought it to my attention. He said you should go on the internet and look at these links now between non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and Roundup. And so, it was not something that my husband was really up for thinking about or talking about, but
right.
I did look at it, and after the fact I did, and that's when I called Brent's office.
Roundup, of course, is the most popular herbicide in the world for agriculture, but it's also enormously popular for home use. And I'm just wondering, the average homeowner probably doesn't even read all the directions that comes with a gallon jug of Roundup and may come in contact with it. And I'm just wondering how extensive home use is. Do you happen to know, Brent?
That's a good question.
Nationwide, I think it's a very popular home herbicide. In fact, I see TV commercials where the guy's going around spraying and killing weeds that pop up in his driveway.
Yeah, and actually, Lloyd, we have our firm actually does this litigation for a variety of people who've been hurt by this drug, by this herbicide, and we actually have quite a few clients who were not farmers. They just simply used it in their home and around in their garden, personal gardens, or in their landscaping of their home, and they've developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma as well. So. I agree. This is not just a risk that's for farmers or agricultural workers, although they're probably the most exposed to Roundup. We're seeing this happening in people who, you wouldn't really necessarily associate with pesticide use. These are people who are just using this product in their home and trying to, keep their weeds under control, thinking that this product is completely safe, and little know that they're subjecting themselves and their family members. And just yesterday, we were contacted by a family who their child developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma at age 11 after they've been using Roundup around their house. And yeah, it's a really dangerous risk, and people really need to be made aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Have there been similar cases that have already been filed and litigated involving the claim that Roundup is the causative agent in these cancers?
I don't know the history of the sort of global litigation status, but I do know that from my understanding, there's probably around 8 or 9 cases that are filed all around the country. I'd say most of them are actually filed here in California, and that's sort of understandable considering we have such a large, agricultural base here in the state.
Right.
But there's cases in Delaware. There's cases. I think there's one in Missouri. There's cases, areas all over the United States, and as of right now, all of those cases are relatively in the beginning stages of litigation. Monsanto is, so far has drawn a hard line and said we're not going to, allow discovery, and we're not going to work with you in these cases. We're going to fight you, until the sun comes down. And so, we've been going through the process of starting that litigation, and there's quite a few firms around the United States that are actually doing this litigation, and we're working very closely with them as well as, Bobby Kennedy to help, because Monsanto is a huge defendant, and it requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of working together to take on,
right.
a well-defended organization.
How long do you expect this litigation before you get to trial? Probably several years?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the judge. For Teri, we're pushing to go to trial as soon as possible. We'd like to go to trial within the next year. Obviously, that's going to depend on a lot of legal issues that need to be resolved beforehand. But realistically, I think we're hopefully in trial within the next 2 to 3 years for sure.
Teri, what has been the reaction in your community? You live in Cambria. It's a small, tight-knit community.
Mm-hmm.
Your husband was a popular figure in the community. Have any of your friends or neighbors come forward and mentioned that they or their maybe a family member, somebody else is coming up with these unusual and rare cancers? Have you had any
Well, the support has been overwhelming from my community through Facebook and just seeing people in town and around. And I have had people call me. I have one friend who called me and talked to me about her rheumatoid arthritis and felt like wondering if that could be related to her Roundup use, and she's no longer using Roundup. And then I've had 2 or 3 people call me that were strangers that have had either themselves or a husband that had contracted non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after years of using Roundup. So there's definitely a lot of people out there that have been negatively affected by this chemical.
Yeah, Jack was only 69 when he died, and you and Jack had 3 children and 2 grandchildren, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, too young. He'd been basically healthy his whole adult life? Jack?
Yes, very healthy. Never smoked, was always ate a really good diet. He had very long-lived people in his family. His uncle lived to be almost 100, and I just assumed that my husband was going to be one of those people,
Yeah. He served in the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam as an artillery forward observer. And when he left the Army as a first lieutenant, the Army awarded him the Bronze Star and Distinguished Flying Cross. After leaving the military, he studied agriculture at Cal Poly and started planting fruit trees on his farm. He later became a leader for Cambria avocado growers. Brent, have you been able to get any interest from either the California legislature or somebody in Congress that says this is not right? What kind of feedback have you got from professional politicians?
The only congressman that I'm familiar with, and for the most part, we have to limit our lobbying efforts because
Sure.
we focus mostly on helping our clients in litigation. But I do know that Congressman Ted Lieu here in California is actually the one sponsoring the charge of the scientists who are looking to testify before the EPA as to why glyphosate should not be re-registered, or if it is re-registered, it should be properly labeled as a carcinogen.
Sorry for that sound. If you can hear it, it's not sure.
Yeah, I didn't hear the sound. No worries. But yeah, so Congressman Ted Lieu I know is involved. I think there are some other. I don't know of any state legislators directly. I have not been contacted by any of them. Obviously, to the extent that a politician wants to make an issue with this, we're happy to work with them because we very much think this is a real important safety issue for not just, as we said, agricultural workers, but people who are using this product in their homes.
As a result of the World Health Organization glyphosate study, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment listed glyphosate as an agent, quote, known to the state to cause cancer. You'd think if the state acknowledges that it causes cancer, they would do something about it. But
you would think.
Yeah, you would think, right. Here's some examples that were provided me of other countries when we started talking about the world's way ahead of the United States. In France, they banned the sale of glyphosate-based herbicides, including Roundup. Same in the Netherlands. In Bermuda, they banned the private or commercial sale of glyphosate Sri Lanka, Colombia. In Brazil, a federal prosecutor asked the country's Justice Department to ban glyphosate. In Argentina, over 30,000 health professionals have been advocating for a glyphosate ban. And in Portugal, the president of the Portuguese Medical Association has called for a worldwide ban on glyphosate. Brent, do you know if anybody from the American Medical Association is speaking out on this topic about the safety of Roundup?
That's an interesting question, because it really depends on who you ask. So many of the scientists that are associated with studying herbicides and pesticides are primarily compensated by Monsanto. I mean,
right.
It is the big fish in the pond. And so, when you start looking at scientists and researchers who are going to offer sort of unbiased opinions about this, unfortunately, you generally have to look internationally and look abroad, because these scientists don't have any sort of financial constraints on them to do this research and to look at these issues. And so I think that's one of the reasons why internationally foreign scientists as well as international regulatory bodies are willing to take a sort of stronger stance on this. Here in the U.S., however, we are working with several medical professionals as well as experts. I can't really go into who they are at this time because it's part of our ongoing litigation, but we are working with quite a few, actually, physicians as well as oncologists, epidemiologists, people who study the effects of disease caused by environmental exposures. And we are building a pretty strong consensus within the scientific community, even here in the United States, that for those people who aren't beholden to Monsanto, they look at the data and they say, yeah, you have a real problem here. There's a real link between glyphosate exposure and cancer. And one of the really interesting things that we're starting to see emerge in the science, Lloyd, is that it's not just exposure to glyphosate that is causing the cancer. It's also exposure to glyphosate plus the chemicals that they add to Roundup to make it more effective with plants.
Synergistic effects.
Exactly. And what we're seeing is that when you just have glyphosate exposure, you have a particular risk. But these chemicals that are added, to glyphosate to make the product we call Roundup actually make glyphosate, penetration 100 times more effective. And so we're seeing that, and that's the rub, right? Because the EPA, for example, here in the United States doesn't test Roundup. They don't test the chemical, glyphosate with all of its chemical components. They're just testing glyphosate. And even there, we're seeing a link between it and cancer. So when you throw in, the fuel to the fire, we're seeing a really clear link between this product and cancer.
Are there other companies that market herbicide with glyphosate in it?
Yes. There's. I think glyphosate is used in quite a few different herbicides and chemicals. I don't know all of them offhand, but if you go to the website, roundupcase.com, we actually have a list of them. So I know Dow AgroSciences, DuPont, Helena. These are all companies that do manufacture various types of herbicides that contain glyphosate in them.
Yeah. Teri, my heart goes out to you, and I applaud your courage in carrying this battle forth.
Thank you.
You're taking on a big opponent, but I hope you succeed, however long it takes.
Thank
and
you.
We can save other lives, maybe, if we can stop these chemicals.
That's what my hope is, too, that we can just raise the awareness to this danger and help prevent other people from having the same fate as my husband.
Yeah, we will certainly follow this case as time goes on. Keep us posted, and every time there's a new development, we'll be glad to talk again. Again, folks, if you want to find out more, www.roundupcase.com. You can check out more there. We're going to take a short break here now. You've been listening to Down in the Valley with Lloyd Carter. We'll be back in a couple moments. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Teri.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you. Thank you.